Hi, my name is Rick Gold. Nan Cohen and myself are from Light Productions. Light Productions are creative, progressive TV programs and movies produced to create community conversation and action. Welcome to our program, The Israeli Refuseniks, filmed on location in Eugene, Oregon, November 19, 2004. At this event, two Israeli young men, Noam, Bahat, and Shimri, Zameret, were in Eugene speaking about their experiences. They were recently released from Israeli military prison after spending almost 2 years for refusing to serve in the mandatory Israeli army. This practice is known as conscription, where young men and women are forced into military service after graduating from high school. In September 2004, 5 Israeli Jewish high school seniors called the Convicted Five, Haggah, Matar, Matan Kamenar, Shimri Zameret, Adam Maor, and Noam Bahat were part of the high school refusers who had served nearly 2 years in Israeli prison for refusing to enlist in the Israeli Defense Forces after high school. After being released, Noam and Shimri decided to go on tour of the United States to speak about the Israeli occupation of Palestinian lands, the reasons for their refusal to be conscripted into the Israeli Defense Forces, their experiences in prison, and about their decision because of their beliefs that the Israeli occupation of Palestine is wrong. In the last 4 years of this occupation, 131 houses have been destroyed, 6,700 Israeli and 28,000 Palestinians have been injured, and 925 Israeli and 9,936 Palestinians have been killed. The American news media has largely been silent on the Israeli refuser movement, and we hope this program inspires community conversation and action here in America. Now, here's our show.
Tonight, our speakers will share their stories, how they chose their particular path, and what the consequences were for their choices. Following their presentation, they will entertain questions from the audience about their experiences, and we assume will also draw into the conversation questions with regard to a possible U.S. draft and the possibility that U.S. youth will likewise need to examine difficult choices that may be forced upon them. On behalf of CCMR, Progressive Responses, and the UO Cultural Forum, I'd like to thank our guests, Noam Bahat and Shimri Zameret, for joining us today to talk about their experiences with Israelis' mandatory military service. They are able to share their experiences here in Eugene and all over the United States thanks to the tour organizers' efforts. They are Refuser Solidarity Network and American Friends Service Committee. Our guests will speak a second time tonight on the UO campus at 7:30, Columbia Room number 150, where they will also receive a welcome from Ibrahim Amidi. As a Palestinian with family living under Israeli occupation, Ibrahim too has a unique connection to this issue. As teens, both Noam and Shimri faced the issue of military duty versus their conscience. Though from different backgrounds and upbringings, they thought deeply about the reality of what they and their friends would be asked to do as soldiers in the Israeli military. As they examined the social and political reality in Israel and dealt with the losses from the violence around them, they chose to follow their inner guide and choose their conscience over military duty. We honor them for their courage and thank them for joining us tonight. Thank you for the kind words.
Shalom. take this up. Well, hi. My name is Shimri, and this is Noam. I'm 20 years old, and he's 21. Actually, a couple of nights ago, we discovered that in the States, that means that he's allowed to buy liquor, and I'm not. Go figure.
In Israel, it's much easier to buy. So.
Yeah, you can do that from the age of 18. Well, 2 months ago, both of us were released from prison after serving a period of 21 months because we refused to enlist to the Israeli army. And we're here to tell you some of our story, tell you our story, and some of the story of the Israeli occupation. Alright.
This is a map of Israel.
This is a map. Yeah, this is a map of Israel. Can everybody see it? Maybe I should. Can you see it when I'm sitting down? Alright. Well, 37 years ago, a war was opened between Israel, Jordan, Egypt, and Syria. Iraq, you heard about Iraq, right? Yeah. It's right here. Well, in 1967 a war was opened, and during that war Israel occupied the West Bank, the Golan Heights, and the Gaza Strip. And ever since, for 37 years, the Palestinian people have been fighting for their independence. Now, a little bit about me. I live in a small village in the north of Israel. Its name is Binyamina. I live with my mother and with my brother, my younger brother. He's 16 years old. My father lives in Long Island, New York. And that's it about me. No?
I'm Noam. I'm from a small village called Shimri. In American terms, that would be the suburb of a suburb of a suburb of a suburb of probably the smallest city in the States. That is exactly here in that curve. Maybe you can see here. And my house is about 300 meters from the occupied territories. And I'd like to begin by telling you a little bit about the period during which I decided to refuse. And I'm saying to refuse, and some of you may not know that in Israel we have a draft and a mandatory conscription. And that means that every person at the age of 18 or 19 has to go to the army. Men are being enlisted for 3 years and women are being enlisted for 2 years. And during that period, when I decided to refuse, that was the second year of the current intifada, the current uprising in the occupied territories. And during that time, I became aware of the fact that the Israeli army is putting Palestinian cities under curfew for longer periods and a lot more often than in the past. Some of the Palestinian cities were actually under curfew for over 6 months. Try to imagine what it means to live under curfew. In the States you have sometimes in some cities curfew, but it means that children can't go outside of their houses after 9 p.m. But when we talk about curfew in the occupied territories, we mean that people are not allowed to leave their houses 24/7. And if you try to understand what that means, it means that children can go to school or go outside and play with their friends. It means that older people can go to university, students can go to university, and it means that their parents can go to work and provide their families, put food on the table. It means a lot of stress, a lot of anger. And of course, when you have cities under curfew for over 6 months, you need to make sure that they get food in a way. So what happened was, that the Israeli army allowed the Palestinians to leave their houses once in a while, usually once a week or every other weekend, for several hours to make some arrangements. The problem was that even when it did that, it did not have any specific way of informing the Palestinians when they're allowed to leave their houses and when they're not. What I mean is that many times the Israeli army removed the curfew for several hours, but then it did not tell the Palestinians, did not inform the Palestinians that when the curfew was issued again. And in many cases, Palestinians were breaking curfew without being aware to that. I'd like to read for you a testimony of Ahmed Shoshne, who is a resident of Jenin. He was 37-year-old at the time. And this testimony might demonstrate the way that the Israeli army deals with Palestinians who were breaking curfew without being aware to that. So here's his testimony. People began to run in all directions, and I immediately went to my car, put my children who were next to the car inside, and drove to Abu Bakr Street, where I saw people in cars. Then I drove west about 20 meters, when I heard more shots being fired. The kids began to scream. I looked behind me and saw a tank standing at the entrance of Abu Bakr Street, about 120 to 150 meters from us. I saw that my son Neil had been injured and was bleeding. I didn't stop and continued driving to get out of the gunfire range. When I left the market, I stopped to see how Neil was. I picked Suad up to move her away from Neil. When I lifted her, I was shocked to see her lifeless body. I began to scream and drove immediately to Al Ghazi Hospital. The doctors pronounced Suad dead on arrival. Neil had been wounded in the right knee and left midsection. Bullet fragments also struck him in the back near his spine. Shada, my other daughter, was also wounded. Fragments had struck her right knee. My friend, Hassan Ali Abu Zaid, who had joined us, had been hit under his shoulder, which led to an injury to his intestines. He was taken to Rambam Hospital, where he underwent a surgery. I was told that his condition was serious. Unfortunately, this testimony is not unique, and the reason why I chose to read for you this specific testimony is just because of the fact that it was taken from that period when I decided to refuse. When I became aware of things like that taking place in the territories all the time, the day-to-day, the daily reality of Palestinians.
I want to tell you another story, and that is the story of Nir, which is one of my friends. I met Nir in the prison, in the military's prison, something like 3 months after I first refused to enlist. And it was a couple of minutes after the evening formations in the military's prison. The sun was just setting, and he walked to me and asked me something like, "Are you one of those conscience objectors?" And I looked at him, I didn't know this guy. It was like just another prisoner. And I said, yes. And then he said, "I think that I'm a conscience objector too." So I was kind of amazed, I thought that I knew all the Refuseniks that sat in prison at that time. And then we sat down and started talking. Can everybody hear me? All right. And I haven't slept a lot in that night because he's told me the story of his service in the military. He, at that time, have been in the military for over a year, and 3 months out of that year, he served as a soldier in the territories. And I couldn't believe that you could have seen so many horrible, awful things in just 3 months. But when we sat down and started speaking, he just kept pouring more and more stories. He told me how a day after a terror attack in Tel Aviv, one of his friends was so angry that in the checkpoint he started abusing a Palestinian, and he recorded the Palestinian begging him with his cell phone. He recorded him begging and asking him to stop hitting him. And then later on, at that night, he played the tape in the base, in the military base. And Nir told me that all of his friends just laughed, were just laughing at the Palestinian begging. And he told me how one of his high officers, a captain, hit a 10 years old boy, Palestinian boy, in the head with the butt of his rifle, real hard, because he was out playing during curfew. And he told me how he saw other soldiers looting and stealing things from stores, from Palestinian stores. And he told me how he saw soldiers hitting a mother and both her childs because they were trying to sneak into Israel to work there. And you know, those are the irregular stuff, things that soldiers are doing that when they're not following orders. But he also told me about the day-to-day stuff that they did and how awful those things made him feel. Like one day when he and his commander were standing at a roadblock next to a road, and the order was to confiscate and destroy every wagon that is going through that road, because they had some sort of intelligence information on a wagon carrying bombs. And this old Palestinian came through the road with his wagon, and Nir's commander told him to stop and told him something like, okay, we're going to break down your wagon. And this old Palestinian farmer started crying, saying, I'm a farmer. I need this wagon to work my land. Without this wagon, I don't have any way of feeding my sons, my grandsons. And Nir told his commander too, come on, look at this guy. He's 90 years old. He's not a terrorist. But his commander told him, those are the orders. And they did it. They took the wagon and they broke it down. And they told the old Palestinian to get back to where he came from. And Nir, at that period, in these 3 months, he was just laying in bed every night in his military base, crying, whole night long. And in the days, he was standing in a checkpoint, in the Israeli checkpoints inside the territories, thinking to himself, if a Palestinian comes and tries to shoot me right now, and I'm here as a soldier with my rifle in the occupied territories as an occupier, this Palestinian is right. I don't have anything to say to him. If I was in his place, I would have done the same. And he just reached to a certain point that he made this rational, logical decision that he would rather die than to continue on doing those things. And he sat one night in his base with his rifle, pointing to his head, with his finger on the trigger, thinking to himself, I should press this trigger. And you know, that's no joke. Every year, a couple of dozens of soldiers are committing suicide during their service in the military. Well, of course, after a couple of minutes, Nir thought to himself something like, I don't know, screw it. I don't care, none of this is worth it. And he went AWOL for a month. He went to his house, and a couple of weeks later, he turned himself into the prison, and there I met him. Now, I like to tell this story, because occupation is a big word. And this story, I believe, illustrates in a pretty good way the price that both our societies, the Palestinian and the Israeli, are paying for this occupation. On the one hand, you got the huge price that the Palestinians are paying. You know, all the things that these soldiers, my friends, are doing to them for 37 years, according to their orders and not according to their orders. But on the other hand, you got the other side, the price that we as a society are paying. And I'm not talking about all those soldiers committing suicide. And I'm not talking about all those guys who get killed or get injured. I'm talking about all the other guys that come back from the territories and from their service, scarred not on their bodies, but scarred on their womb, on their soul, on their soul. And that's a huge price to pay. And that's not a price just for this year or the next year. It's a price for generations to come, because those soldiers will have wives, and they'll have sons, and they'll have grandsons, and all their families and friends are going to suffer from the trauma that they suffer, that they have.
In school or in life in Israel, we'll learn about other conflicts. We'll learn about other occupations, like the British occupation in India and in Israel, the French occupation in Algeria, the American war in Vietnam, the American occupation in Afghanistan and Iraq today, the Israeli occupation in Sinai, the Israeli occupation in Lebanon that ended only 4.5 years ago. And when we observe all these occupations, wars, conflicts, we come to the conclusion that there is only one solution to this kind of conflict. The occupying country will withdraw from the occupied territories, and an independent state will be established. And today, almost anyone who's familiar with this conflict would tell you that he knows more or less what would be the general draft of the final compromise. Israel will withdraw to the 1967 borders with minor adjustments subjected to a formula of a yard for a yard. And there will be some sort of compromise regarding Jerusalem that will be either to divide it into two separated cities or to transform it into a binational capital. There will be creative compromises regarding holy places on both sides. And there will be a compromise regarding the 1948 Palestinian refugees. And that compromise will include Israel's recognition and its responsibility towards them, and the compensation of them, and probably the returning of some of them into the territories of Israel. So, the solution to this conflict is obvious and clear. And if the solution to this bloodshedding conflict has been clear for so long, then we need to ask ourselves, why are we not implementing it? And it's a bad joke that we're not implementing this obvious solution to this bloodshedding conflict. And to tell you the truth, 37 years is a darn long time to tell a bad joke. But still, we need to ask ourselves, why are we not implementing this obvious solution? And the answer to that is that against this simple solution stands the united front. And I'm talking about the Palestinian and Israeli front. On the Palestinian side, I'm talking about those terrorist organizations committing malicious suicide bombings on Israeli civilians. On the Israeli side, I'm talking about the settlers who are willing to or want to continue to live in the settlements on someone else's expense. And I'm talking about the present government, who continues to build the settlements and to transfer money towards the settlements, who continue to make life harder on the Palestinians, and who continues to build the separation wall on such a route that severely damages the Palestinians' lives. However, we also have a different front. The peace camp, the left, whatever you want to call us, we are part of this front. We are also a united front of Israelis and Palestinians. On the Palestinian side, I'm talking about those Palestinians who are protesting against the occupation in non-violent ways, and by that creating an opposition to the terrorist organizations. And I'm talking about those Palestinians who are willing to continue and have a dialogue with Israelis even in those bloodshedding times. And I'm talking about those Palestinians who are working together with Israelis. I'm also talking about, in the Israeli side, individuals, movements, even parties who are continuing to protest against our own government's policy in the streets, in demonstrations, in the territories. And I'm talking about those Israelis who are working with the Palestinians, helping them to harvest their olive trees whenever the army or the settlers are making it impossible. And I'm talking about those Israelis who are working to open dialogue within the Israeli society. And I'm also talking, especially in the last few years, about the refusal movement, the growing movement that we are part of. Unfortunately, it is still unclear if we will win the battle of the implementation of the final compromise to this conflict, because we're still a minority. And just so you understand why is it so important that we'll actually end this conflict as soon as possible, I'd like to give you some of the numbers that demonstrate the toll that both societies are paying. And these are numbers that refer only to the last 4 years. I'm talking about the destruction of over 1,000 houses of Palestinians. Some estimations are now, I hear, talking about 4,000 houses of Palestinians. I'm talking about the injuries of 6,700 Israelis and the enormous number of 28,000 Palestinians. 28,000. And worst of all, I'm also talking about the lives of 925 Israelis and 2,936 Palestinians. And these numbers are updated for 4 weeks ago, so they're higher now. This is the price that both societies are paying for this conflict.
Now, growing up in Israel, I knew those numbers. And I came to realize that stories like the story I told you about, the things that Nir told me that they're doing, that he and his friends did, and stories like the story that Noam told you when he read the testimonies, these kind of things happen every day in the West Bank and in the Gaza Strip. So when I was about the age of some of the people who sit in this room, when I was 16, 17, I decided that the most powerful tool that I have to fight this conflict, to fight this occupation, to fight for peace, is to refuse to enlist to the Israeli army. And when I reached the age of 18, actually when both of us reached the age of 18, we went to the induction base and we refused to enlist. And we got sent into jail. And after a couple of periods in prison, each of the periods for about a month, they opened a court-martial against us. This is Noam and me and 3 of our other friends, Adam, Matan, and Chagai. They opened the court-martial against the 5 of us. The trial lasted for 10 months. Maybe you can shut the light somehow? Can you see in the back?
Yes.
All All right, you have pretty good eyes. I can hardly see it from here. All right. So the trial lasted for 10 months, and when it ended, we got sentenced to 1 year in addition to all the periods we have already served in jail. And this is the day. This is a couple of days after the trial ended. This is actually the day that we got into prison. Actually, you can see us smiling here. That's because we're still not inside the prison. But a couple of hours later, we were in, and this is a picture of Noam and me in the blue shirt with handcuffs. Now Noam is on the right, and this is just that you would know that we're for real. You know, we have been in prison. There's real handcuffs. All right, bad joke. Sorry. This is a picture of some Palestinians getting detained in one of the Israelis' checkpoints in the occupied territories. Sometimes they're being detained for hours. This is a Palestinian that got arrested in one of the checkpoints. You can see that his face are covered and his hands are cuffed. And this is a picture. Can you see that one too? All right. This is a picture of an Israeli soldier at one of the checkpoints.
The reason that I like to show this specific picture is, well, you can hardly see, but this is a picture where you can actually see the soldier from the eyes of the Palestinians. And this soldier is not doing anything special. He's just standing in the checkpoint, doing his orders. To my knowledge, he hasn't done anything unique. He's just staying there with this rifle aimed at you. And this is how a soldier looks like from the eyes of the Palestinians. It's really intimidating, and it's really frightening to me.
I like this picture from a different reason. You can see here in that picture, you can see the soldier's face. And I always, when I'm looking at that picture, I'm always thinking to myself about this guy. You know, he's just 18 years old. He's a kid, a child, and he stands there with his rifle. I don't know what he have already seen, what he will see in the next years. But I speak with my friends, and I know how frightened he is when he stands in that checkpoint. Now, a lot of people ask me, was it worth it sitting 21 months in prison? And I tell them about a letter that we got a year ago. And this is a letter from a Palestinian, and for me this was amazing because this Palestinian actually wrote something like, I was helping the Hamas, which is a terror organization, and I helped them organize terror acts, terror bombing. But now I heard about you guys, and I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm going to resist to the occupation in a non-violent way from now. And for me, when people ask me, was it worth it? I answer them that for me, the whole 2 years, almost 2 years, were worth it just for this one letter.
A couple of announcements.
Yeah, a short announcement, and then we'll have questions.
Well, I hope you're enjoying hearing these stories, and we're going to open it up to some question and answer comments from the audience. But in order to make this happen tonight, it took quite a bit of organizing and some finances, and we're hoping that you all will help offset that and can support Noam and Shimri to continue their tour, continue sharing their story. As you came in, there were two cans. One is to help local organizations that are putting this on, and the other is for the Refuser Solidarity Network. And if you're able to contribute, we would sure appreciate it. You can make checks out to the Refuser Solidarity Network, and in the memo, put Noam and Shimri, and that way they'll know how to direct those funds. So if you weren't able to do that on the way in, we sure hope that you'll do that on your way out and continue to support this kind of speaking event. And anything else? Or should we just do the questions?
Maybe explain a little bit for what we're doing with the donations, with cash and checks that you write.
The money, of course, is not going to our pocket. So you probably ask yourselves, what do they need the money for? The answer is that we have other friends who are now supposed to enter prison, and they need support in legal aid, and they need support in ads, so people will know that there are people who are being imprisoned, and that the time that they serve in prison will not be in vain, and that their voice will be heard. There is also one girl named Noam, which is one of the first women refusers who have served time in prison. She already served 2 periods in prison, and she went and appealed to the Supreme Court in Israel in order for it to give her help, to assist her, to make sure that the army won't imprison her again. But unfortunately, the Supreme Court has decided against her, not once, but twice. And now she has no option except for to face the army again, and she's supposed to enter prison again in a week or so. And also she needs to pay for the legal aid for the appealing to the Supreme Court. That was important not just for her, but also for the future of other women who might be in the same situation. And also she needs support for legal aid because she might face trial like us, because now the army has more force against her, more power against her, because she has received a backup from the Supreme Court. This is just, these are the main things that need to be done with the money.
This is some of the things we do with the donations.
I was just going to say, and you can add more, but as you realize, these young guys are perfectly capable of facilitating themselves in the discussion here. I'll help out if need be, but just for a couple ground rules. One is, I think, obvious. It's going to be hard to hear you, so please stand up and speak loudly and clearly. Also, I want to recognize that they have given a good example of speaking their own truth from their own perspective. And as we share tonight, and if you have questions or comments, I would like to encourage you to take their lead and speak from your own truth, your own piece of the truth, and your own perspective. They're here about sharing how they see the world and how they're making their choices, as opposed to telling everybody exactly how it is and what people should believe. So I hope that we can follow their lead on that.
Another thing is, I really want to request that everybody will treat in respect to other people's questions. A couple of nights ago, we had this really, somebody asked a question that was maybe, I don't know, not supportive, not to us. And we actually want this kind of response and this kind of questions, people that don't agree with us. And we got really bad reactions, so I'm sure that won't happen tonight.
So, first of all, feel free to ask whatever is on your mind. We promise to respect everyone, and we would like to ask of you again to respect people. Yes.
I just have a comment on the draft that's coming here to the United States, is that by all accounts, the U.S. draft, which is probably going to be in 2005, is not slated to have an exemption for college students. And here we have 3 universities, LCC, University of Oregon, and Northwest Christian College. What is the impact on Eugene if all 3 of these institutions are downsized or shut down because of the draft? This is something we need to talk about in the community here. And there's also a number of countries that 30, 40 years ago harbored draft evaders, like Canada, is not going to do that now. When you have Dick Cheney saying this is a war that will not end in our lifetime, this is, we need to talk about why they are doing this endless war for oil and how they've managed to muzzle the media to avoid discussion of these things. One other thing, in the New York Times last month, they said that the draft age, if you have technical skills, will be 44 years of age.
So were people able to catch some of that, most of that? Yes?
Okay.
I have 2 questions, please.
Yes.
One is, will both of you have to report again, and this will come up again, and you will serve time again? And then the second question is, what is the support from your family, and are your brothers and sisters following what you're doing?
The first question was, is this over for us, or are we going to face another trial when we get back to Israel? And the second question was whether we receive support from our family and whether our younger siblings are going to follow us.
About the first question, no. We're finished with the army. We got we got exempted 5 days after we were released from prison. We even got a certificate, actually, saying you're not worthy of serving in the army.
That was a compliment.
Yeah, for us that was kind of a compliment. About the other question,
We have different families, so we have different answers.
yeah.
But regarding my family, it was very hard for my parents at the beginning to, first of all, it was hard for them to support my decision because they knew that I'm going to prison and they can't help me when I'm imprisoned. And second of all, it was also hard for them to support me ideologically. My father was an officer in the army. He served in the army almost 10 years. And it's a taboo in Israel to refuse, especially in that part of the society that I come from. But in time, after we already entered prison and my parents met other parents of refusers and other people their age who were supportive of us, it was much easier for them to understand what are my motives and why am I doing that. And first of all, they became supportive of me as parents, and then they started supporting me ideologically. And regarding my siblings, I have an older brother who is a soldier right now. He's actually in a combat unit. And he's still in the army, and he's going to stay in the army for the next year at least. And regarding my younger brothers, I hope they won't have to go to the army. But I think my sister, who's going to be conscripted in 2 years or so, she plans to go to the army, but she will refuse to serve in the territories. That's what she says.
My mother actually walked through pretty much the same route that Noam's parents went through. And she started by not support, by really being pissed off by the fact that I refused. And she changed her mind. She started reading the newspaper, she started watching the news. And she actually became so supportive that this one night, some young activists and both our mothers went graffiti spraying together. Yeah, that's our moms.
Yes.
I'm curious what your trial experience was like. Why it took 10 months?
The trial experience?
Yeah, what was the nature of that trial?
What was the nature of that trial?
Shall I answer? I think that our trial was supposed to look like it's fair, but we didn't stand a chance to begin with because it's a court-martial, it's a military trial, which means that the judge is a soldier in itself, and he can't make a decision that is against the army and the army's policy in general. And if the army's policy is not to acknowledge conscientious objectors' rights, right to be conscientious objectors and to avoid service in the army, then he can't rule against it. And however, it was a good stage for us to to put our claims against the occupation and to publicize our stance and to tell the story of other refusers and to call the Israeli society to question the things that we're doing in the territories, to ask ourselves, why are we doing these things? And I'm not sure if we managed to do it the best way, because we were under arrest at the time and we had people who supported us and did it for us, but I think we did achieve some of our goals, and we used the stage that we received from the trial. Okay, please.
Right. I have a short tale and a quick tale.
Speak louder.
Quick question. Okay.
Use the mic.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
All right. All right. I'm Jewish and I visited Israel 8 years ago. And I remember visiting a commune in the Lebanese.
Speak closer to the mic.
I'm Jewish. 8 years ago, I visited Israel and I went to a commune on the Lebanon-Israel border. And if you're familiar with the Lebanese-Israel border, you know the 50-foot field of scattered landmines and the 30-foot, razor wire, 50,000 volt electrified fence and all that. Okay, fine. Anyways, this commune, there were two people there. There was a husband and a wife. And apparently, I guess in the year 94 and 95, 50 children, women, and men were basically slaughtered and killed by these Lebanese people who found their way across the border into Israel. And when it comes to the military, the Israeli military, a big, regardless of current events and current issues, with the Palestinians and whatever event, current controversial issue you want to bring to light, a big part of the military is border patrol and defending and guarding a country.
Would I prefer to serve in the army or to get deported from Israel? And my answer is that I don't really know. I think that if Israel was a country that deports people who don't serve in the army, that wasn't a country that I would like to live in. That's not a country that I want to live in. But about the story that you told a little bit about the Lebanonian border, that's quite interesting because 4 years ago, after you left Israel, we withdrew from Lebanon, from the occupied territories we occupied inside Lebanon. And ever since, an amazing thing happened. We have silence. We have a silent border with Lebanon. And I think there's something like 70 soldiers every year. 70 soldiers have been died in the war with Lebanon. And for 4 years, nobody dies there. And I think that's a good example of what we're trying to accomplish by refusing. Israeli generals agree that the easiest way to defend Israel, where is the map? The easiest way to defend Israel is to withdraw from the West Bank and from the Gaza Strip and to have a border with the Palestinians. Because it's much easier to defend the border than it is to control a civilian population. Right now, our soldiers are inside the West Bank and inside the cities. Maybe I can show you. I have a slide here of the West Bank side. So if its purpose is to separate Israelis from Palestinians, on its current route, the separation fence doesn't do that. All right.
I support you 100%.
All right.
Okay, he asked two questions. What do you think is going to be the effect of the re-election of President Bush, or the non-re-election of President Bush? And he also asked what would be, what do you think is going to be the effect of the death of Arafat? And regarding President Bush, I think that he was among those people who prevented us from having peace in Israel by the fact that he used his power not to pressure on Sharon and his government, but to back him up on everything that he does. And that interference, not just that he didn't interfere on or to assist us, that interference was one of the things that allowed Sharon to do all those things and enabled him to do it. So I think in that sense that the re-election of President Bush is not a good thing for us. Though I'm not sure if President Kerry would have been much better in the Middle East, because the things that he said during the elections were not that much of a good sign, but who knows. Regarding Arafat, I think that regardless of the fact that he was not a good leader for his people, and he was corrupt, and he took money that was supposed to serve the Palestinians that they received from Europe and from other places, and he and people who are close to him received this money for their own pocket. I think that it was an excuse, and it's a lame excuse that Israel and President Bush were using just to name Arafat someone not to talk to. And in that sense, I don't think that his death is necessarily changing anything. I think that if you want to find a new excuse not to talk with people, then you might find it if you want it. But we also might see if the Israeli leadership and the Palestinian leadership and the United States will choose to go towards peace, then we might see it as a new opportunity. Because they didn't want to talk to Arafat, so if they don't want to seek for new excuses, maybe they can start talking with peace, for peace.
I actually think that Arafat's death, I agree with what Noam said, but I think that it might be a good thing. It might clear the way for new Palestinian leaders, like Abu Mazen, like Mohammed Khan, like Marwan Barghouti. And that might be a step, it depends on what Bush will do, what Sharon will do, what the Palestinians, it might be a good start.
I'm interested in the map we had on the screen when we came in. Anything outside here at all, right? We haven't seen maps of the West Bank, which show two things. They show the pattern of settlement, and they also show the shape of the Palestinian state, the one that was offered at Oslo or in other negotiations, which is this patchwork kind of pattern of isolated Palestinian settlement. It's not like a contiguous state. And I'm just curious to know if you explain a little bit what's going on in that map. I've never seen a map like
This
that.
is not a map that had anything to do with the final compromise, the thing that was suggested. And this is a map of the West Bank. This is an enlargement of this part in this map. And you got here the blue spots are Israeli settlements. For 37 years we've been building Jewish Israeli settlements inside the West Bank. And the red dots are Palestinian villages and Palestinian cities. And now as you can see, these are the red dots are areas that right now the Palestinians have under their control. Although the Israeli army does enter there to commit operations and to ruin houses, to take, to arrest Palestinians. And they actually, you can see it right here, that in between the Palestinian, the entire West Bank is divided to areas. And if you're Palestinian from this village, for example, you won't be able to go through the road and to get to here. You need to, if you make it, you can try to go through the field, off-road. But mostly you get checkpoints and roadblocks between each of the areas, which doesn't allow the Palestinians to, sometimes to visit their families, sometimes to go to university, sometimes to go to work. And that is the situation right now. That's all of them.
Is that a map that comes from Israeli government? Or?
No, this is a map that was published by B'Tselem. This is a human rights watch organization, Israeli organization, which in the last 15 years is doing tremendously important work in reporting the human rights violation taking place in the territories. Can you speak up?
Yeah. I'm a Palestinian Israeli and I come from...
I can't hear you.
Good evening. I'm a Palestinian Israeli and I come from the same space as these young people come from, and I'm a peace activist myself. And I just need to emphasize that the great job that these young men are doing, and just to tell everyone that maybe they did not convey how important their job is and their resistance is, because in Israeli society, you serve the army, it's not about just being in the army, it's about passage, it's about who you are, it's about your identity as Israeli. And in their resistance, they're giving certain part of their identity as Israelis, and they're gonna have a lot of problems. They're gonna have difficulty to find a job. They're gonna have difficulty with people who want to hang out with them, because the military experience shapes your experience. So they're giving this part of their identity, and I think it's very important that people know that. And I just want to tell you that a lot of Palestinians in Israel and Palestine knows about me and recognize the effort, and we also see it as a symbol of hope. And I know it's not easy, but it's a long road. And I know now, okay, so Arafat is not there, so I don't agree with you about what you think of Arafat. And I know there's corruption, there's also corruption in the Israeli government too. And we might disagree about the definition of terror and what is terror, and we need to like clarify more the way this word is used, because we know that when kill civilians is terror, it's difficult, and it's in a way it's a form of terror, but we need also to recognize where this terror is coming from, and it's an act of despair, and it's not easy. And I just want to tell you, God bless you, and I really hope there'll be more and more people like you, because you'll give us some hope, and that we'll support you in every way possible.
I'd like to, first of all, to thank you. I don't think you mentioned your name. Sure? Amal? Thank you, Amal. And I'd like to add that, of course, I think that not just that Arafat, I don't think that he was a good leader. I also think that we have horrible leaders ourselves that are also sometimes corrupted. Sharon is a good example for that. So corruption is a bad thing on both sides. I think it's a way for us to see that our leaders are serving other interests than our interests, the interests of the people. And if our leaders would not be corrupt, maybe they would be serving the interests of the people, and then we could achieve peace far more easily. And this refers not to just, it refers to all leaders. I think it refers very much to President Bush also. And regarding terror, I just want to clear what do I mean when I say terror. And this is a general definition. Terror, for me, the way that I understand it and the way that I use it, is whenever you have a struggle that is pointed at civilians, whether they're Israelis or Palestinians. And in that sense, in many cases, the Israeli army, the American army, lots of other armies are committing terror when they're hitting civilians. In that sense, many times Palestinians are committing terror. And also there is need to make the distinction between people who are fighting against civilians and people who are fighting not against civilians, against soldiers, such as the insurgents in Iraq who are fighting against American soldiers and they're not committing terror. And similar things who are happening in Israel who are not called terror in my eyes. Although I support non-violent struggle anywhere, I think that this distinction needs to be pointed out, that this is not terror, and this is not what I refer to when I say terror.
I'm not sure that I do agree with you on the fact that terror is acts that are committed against civilians, but I'm not sure that I can say that there's a policy of the states or Israel to kill civilians. I don't think that I've heard about this kind of Israeli policy to kill, that its purpose is to kill civilians. And I distinct a very harsh distinction between terror and the occupation. Terror for me is the Palestinian terror, the Hamas terror is fighting for a just cause in an unjust way.
Demonstrations and meetings for Palestinians, I think 2 years ago, 83. A terrorist is somebody who has a bomb but no air force.
But we can also have terrorists in power.
What?
We have terrorists
it's a whole discussion. It's just using words, terms, it's terms. It doesn't really matter. It's clear that I object to the occupation and I object to terror. And that's it.
Yes.
I have a couple of questions and an announcement. The question is about the Refuseniks movement. Is it growing? Is it mostly at this point among young people, or is it also some career people from the military? Is it people refusing to be in the military totally, or refusing to serve in the occupied territory? What's the state of the refusing movement?
Well, currently we've got something like 1,600 Refuseniks in the refusal movement in Israel. From this number, something like 500, 600 actually set time in jail. We've got many kinds of Refuseniks. We got enlistment Refuseniks like us. We got pilots who refused to enlist, pilots who refused to commit certain acts in the territories. You've got reserve forces that refused to come back into the occupied territories, and you've got people in high school that are saying we won't serve in the occupied territories, or we refuse to enlist. And there's many kinds of refusal. I think that the thing that they all have in common is the fact that they're all saying, I won't take part in the occupation. That's it.
I have an announcement too, and that's that there is a letter circulating among American Jews to President Bush, basically presenting a different viewpoint than many of the Jewish leaders who were supporting the U.S. government supporting Sharon. So if anyone's interested in signing that letter, if you speak to me, I can get it to you.
Maybe you can give us a site that people can use. We'll do it. Yeah.
On a more personal note, I guess I'm curious about, you spoke a little bit about the response of your peers when you decided to take this action. How about your families? Are they supportive of you in this? Was there someone there in terms of explaining or understanding what you're doing, or were they really supportive of your stand on this?
We have different families with different reactions. But my family, it was very hard for my parents, and my brothers were really supportive to the extent that they understood. But for my parents, it was really hard to support me. First of all, because of the fact that I made a choice to do something that the price for is to be imprisoned, and it was very hard for them to support this decision, to support the fact that I'm going to do something that they won't be able to help me with, and they won't be able to pull me out of prison. It's a very hard thing for parents, not to be able to assist their children. But also it was hard for them to support it ideologically. My father was an officer in the army for almost 10 years. And it was hard, but after they met other people, their range, and people who supported us, and other parents of refusers, it was easier for them to understand what are my motives, what are the reasons because of which I'm actually taking that stand, because it was easier for them to listen to people their age than to their son. And this is the way parents are. But then they started supporting me at the beginning as parents, and eventually even ideologically. My mom really became active, not just for my release, for our release, but also against the occupation on various fronts. Right now she's head of a group that fights against a specific settlement that's being built very close to my house, as I mentioned, living very close to the territories, and they want to cleanse a specific area and to add it to our place, to build a settlement inside the territories, but because of the short distance to connect it to the place that I live in, and my mom's fighting against it. And at one point, she became really active against our imprisonment. That one night, she and Shimri's mom and some other young activists, really radical ones, they went graffiti spraying in the streets of Tel Aviv. Yeah, that's our moms. Power to the mothers. Well, yes, the draft is for male and for female, and males and females at the age of 18 are drafted. In the last year, we had a change in the policy, and they started imprisoning girls too. And I told in the beginning about one of our friends, Laura, that got imprisoned twice for 2 periods. And she might have to spend the same amount of time that we spent. And she just appealed to the Supreme Court, and it denied her appeal, and she's probably going back to prison in a couple of days.
Are there any differences between the way they
Yeah, up until now, the Army's policy toward girls, or something, girls refuseniks, was kind of chauvinist approach. We don't really need those girls. They don't really matter, so we can just exempt them. There's a bit of it's kind of complicated. There's different laws. The law recognizes women's right to have conscience to be conscience objectors, but not the guys. And the Army is saying that there's no discrimination. But up until now, they haven't imprisoned them, the girls, and they have just started.
This woman gave a beautiful example of the courage it took for you to do this because of the role of the Army in your society. What price will you pay in the future? Will you be admitted to university?
Well, regarding work, we're not going to be able to work in security and things that have to do with security. We won't be able to work in companies that are working with the Army or the security office in Israel. In other fronts, in other places of work, they might accept us, they might not. I think it balances to some amount, at least I hope so. Well, the fact that there are people who support us, and there is growing support. In that sense, I want to say that there is a huge improvement in Israel, because when we decided to refuse 3 years ago, 4 years ago, we decided to refuse already, and when we actually refused, there was very little amount of support for refusers, and now there's a lot more support. And there was a survey that showed that about 40% of the Israeli youth is now supporting of refusers and the right to refuse. Even if they don't support it ideologically, they support and respect the right to refuse. And about 30% of the whole population. So this is something new. This is something that happened because our publicity and the publicity of other refusers, such as the pilots and the reserve service refusers and the high school seniors later. And this is something that is good. Does that answer your question?
At the university, do you feel?
No, there will be no discrimination regarding university. To my understanding, there's hardly, besides the law, nobody asks you when you go to the university in Israel, what have you done in the army? There's actually a law in Israel against discriminating on the basis of your military service. Of course, you can find a lot of places where the military service is used to discriminate Arabs, for example. You can see a lot of cafes in Tel Aviv that has a sign saying, "We need a worker after military service."
And that means that's a politically correct way of saying we need a worker, we just don't want it to be an Arab, because the Arabs don't have to enlist, and they don't have a draft for Israeli Arabs. All right.
Can you explain about who's exempt from the draft in Israel for religious and other reasons?
The question was, who is exempted from the draft in Israel for religious reasons or any other reasons? And the answer is that Arab people, Israeli Palestinians, are exempted automatically from the draft. And women can be exempted for religious reasons. Men can only be exempted for religious reasons if they study religion during the time that they're supposed to be enlisted, and for the next 5 or 6 years, until the age of 24. So it's not really an exemption for religious reasons. It's a sort of status quo that exists from, I think it's from 52 or something like that, that if they will actually learn religion, if they will study religion during that time, they will not have to be called for service. That's it.
Yes, you say.
Most Americans, most of the world, are aware that for many decades, the United States has been fully supportive of Israeli policy in Palestine. Can you tell us how you view the reasons for the United States having been so fully supportive all of these years? What has the United States to gain from this?
The question, what everybody heard? Should I repeat the question?
Yes.
Please do. He asked about the American involvement in Israel and in the occupation, and he asked what the states have to benefit from it. That's two questions. And I'll say that I think that in the last 4 years, President Bush's involvement and supporting our present government has been one of the most important forces, most important vectors that caused the fact that the last 4 years were so bleeding in Israel and in Palestine. The fact that so many Israelis and Palestinians got killed were a consequence of the fact that President Bush haven't involved and haven't pressured Sharon. I don't know if you know that, but your tax money is paying for the Israeli occupation. Every Israeli is getting something like $1,000 a year from the states. Yeah, and it's not like this money is used to buy medications or food. This money is used to buy F-16. This money is used to buy tanks. I can show you. This is actually my jacket, and I use it because it's a good jacket. I got it in the military prison, and it's American. So thank you. So one of the things, one of the campaigns we're actually trying to do to start in Israel right now at the Israeli peace camp is a campaign of stop buying us weapons, stop funding the occupation. And I can also say that there's a divestment campaign against Caterpillar, which is a company that builds the separation fence, and they actually designed for the Israeli army and a special tank, which is called the D9, which is meant to destroy houses. And that's about the first question.
What does the United States have to gain? It's $1 million or $6 billion question. That's what they invest every year in Israel. I think that, first of all, the United States was looking for an ally in the Middle East. I think it was looking for, some state that will commit their policy in the Middle East to pressure on other countries. This is my opinion. But also one of the most important things is that presidents throughout the history in the United States wanted to satisfy a Jewish population in the States. I think this is one of the reasons. And I think that one of the problems was for Jewish people to go against the Israeli policy because they wanted to support Israel and they thought that by supporting the Israeli policy they're supporting Israel. And I think it's something that needs to be understood, that supporting Israeli policy is not supporting Israel. And I think that by that you can also, if you explain that to Jewish people in the States, you can also minimize their pressure on the presidents. Groups like AIPAC, for instance, who are influencing. It looks like Judy is unsatisfied.
I don't agree, but that's all right. I'm not a business.
I know that you're not here speaking. This is Judy Kolokov. She's the person who's responsible for this tour. And for I want to take this moment that Judy got interfered to really acknowledge her just for a minute. And this is actually the last night that we spent with her because tomorrow we're heading to San Francisco. And this amazing lady here, this amazing riot, have been in the last, I don't know, 3 months, just working 60 hours a week to organize this tour. And I really, really want to thank you for the opportunity to do it. You should. She is just amazing, and really thank you very much.
Thank you. This has been one of the most exciting things in my life, and I really appreciate it. Thank you.
It was interesting that you said American presidents have felt that they owed a debt to Jewish American people. Jewish Americans are such a small proportion of the population of the United States. Why should it have such a great impact on all these presidents over the years?
Good question. Maybe because they felt that this is the group that will actually, that they can actually change their opinion. For instance, I think that it's a known fact that people of color are most of them are supporting the Democrats, and other groups are mostly supportive of the Republicans. Maybe the Jewish group, because of their interest in Israel, is something that one of the groups that you can actually shift by saying something that might have a small effect on the other groups, but it's very important for this group. This is one of my ways of analyzing this. I also think that it's not the only reason why the United States was supporting that. The Israeli government, and I said those things at the beginning. I said that I think that the United States was looking for an ally in the Middle East, a country that will be committing its policy and putting pressure on Arab countries in the Middle East. And I think there are probably other reasons that I can think of right now.
One more question and we'll finish. It's ours, and it probably was 2,000 years ago under Israel, I don't know, Jewish Hebrew jurisdiction, right? And I'll give my answer to that. It's actually, that's an easy one for me. You know, when we argue with people in Israel, we argue a lot. I have argued a lot in the last 5 years in prison, outside of prison, with my peers and with my family, with people on the street and on the bus, on the train. And yeah, in Judith's car. And that's easy because those people are talking about justice. You know, it's just that we'll have Yehuda Shomron, Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, because they were ours. And I'm always saying, you know, I don't really care about finding justice, and because Jewish are saying it's just that we'll have the West Bank, and the Palestinians are saying it's just that we'll have the West Bank, and you got two narratives collapsing with each other. I'm not interested in judging who's the right one and who's not right. What I am interested in is in finding a compromise that will allow my family and my friends to live in peace. And that compromise for 37 years is clear. You got the UN standing behind this compromise, you got the States, you got Europe, you got the peace camp from both sides supporting this kind of compromise, and that is the two-state solution. And there won't be any other but this solution. And that's my answer.
I agree with the things that Shimri said in general, but I'd like to add that it's not just that you can say those things. You can also say Israel is not just Yehuda and Samaria. It's also Syria, and it's called